the elite of the elite.
Our job is to go out and catch the baddest of the bad.
Even more secretive than the renowned SEAL Team 6, they exist entirely in the shadows.
The Pentagon won't even confirm the existence of the Delta Force.
Generally speaking, it's the last thing the most evil people in the world see.
We go behind the scenes with a few outsiders who've unlocked details of secret Delta missions.
If there's any way to keep America's involvement out of the headlines, that's when you call it Delta Force.
If the unit would have been responsible for the UBL takedown, it would have been much, much more low-key.
And for the first time, we hear from former operators emerging from the shadows with never-before-revealed details.
The Delta soldier is without question the most effective fighter in the world.
Panama City, 1989. Mounting tensions between dictator Manuel Noriega and the United States have reached the breaking point. Noriega, a former ally in the war on drugs, has turned and now represents a threat to the neutrality of the Panama Canal and to thousands of U.S. citizens living in the country. When Noriega declares a state of war with the U.S., the first President Bush sets in motion Operation Just Cause, a plan for a full invasion of Panama by U.S. forces to depose Noriega and stabilize the region. But before the invasion starts, a top-secret mission must be carried out. A daring hostage rescue of an American civilian by Delta Force, the elite Army unit most highly trained for such a risky operation.
Some of the specialized missions that the unit gets is like one I was involved with in Panama, Operation Acid Gamma, which was the rescue of Kurt Muse from Modelo Prison.
Kurt Muse, suspected of being a CIA operative, has been arrested by the Panamanians for setting up covert anti-Noriega radio transmissions. Delta Force knows his life is in immediate danger.
We knew we had to go in and get him early on because if the invasion would have been initiated, most certainly would have been executed, so we had to get him actually before it all kicked off.
23 Delta operators are dispatched to extract Kurt Muse from Panama's most notorious prison.
It was a high-risk mission, naturally, to put that unit in harm's way on foreign soil. The president, Joint Chiefs, and everybody else, they're taking a big risk, taking a big gamble for that not to fail.
It was funded, and it was a priority mission right from the very top, and we did rehearsals in many different places, including rehearsals in Panama, believe it or not.
Well, when we first heard about it, we began the training process, which was continuous for about 6 months.
I mean, full-scale mock-ups, timelines, downed aircraft, casualties, what if we can't do the breach, all those went into rehearsals.
The Delta Force team has inside intel that enables them to build a full-scale model of the prison on which to practice.
And we had good intelligence where he was at because there was a doctor that had been seeing him on a regular basis and feeding us intelligence.
Our biggest concern was that we only knew of certain parts of the prison. When the doctor would go down and visit Kurt, he could only see so much, so the model really only contained so much of the interior.
When the time comes to go, the commando team will be inserted onto the roof of the prison by MH-6 Little Bird helicopters.
I was an assaulter on the mission, and we would make entry on the roof and then go down. He was down 2 floors.
But we were the primary rescue guys, if you will, to get to his cell. That was our main responsibility.
My particular role was the breacher. I was to effect the breach and get Kurt out.
The unit gets word that the main invasion will commence at 12:45 a.m.
We got alerted. We need to get in quick. We need to be light. So you literally stood on a scale before you got on the helicopter.
2 helicopters move in to fire on the Panama Defense Force headquarters across the street from the prison, providing security for the operation.
As soon as those 2 ships lifted, then we started our approach in. We had snipers on the ground that actually had eliminated some guards.
The Delta team lands on the prison roof. uses charges to breach the rooftop door, then races down.
Now we're on the second floor where Kurt was at. Cleared that hallway, and then I shot immediately to Kurt's cell. Muser, are you in there? And he goes, yeah. I said, hey, we're Americans. We're here to get you out.
They brought him out, went up top. Everything's on track.
And from that point, it was like, we're good to go.
At this point, we're thinking we're good. Everything's great until we lift off.
And then, near disaster. Instead of taking off, the chopper dips down to street level.
I don't know if we were overweight. That's what I think it was. And then we did a hard bank to the left and landed right in front of the prison, front door.
The pilot manages to lift the helicopter off again, but the team is now taking heavy fire from the Panamanian Defense Forces.
Helicopter took off, and Pat remembers the rounds coming into the helicopter.
From the machine gun fire that was stitching the tail boom, Kelly got hit in the lower abdomen. I caught the next bullet, which went inside my right knee and came out by my right hip.
Despite Pat and Kelly's injuries, everyone aboard the chopper manages to take cover in an alley nearby.
We got Kelly. We set up a perimeter, and we started passing out the guns because we were the only ones there.
The Delta team leader manages to signal one of the U.S. gunships flying overhead with an infrared strobe light.
Well, we had a backup plan.
We had planned a secondary force who would be a ground insertion on the armored personnel carriers. They were already in the area when our bird went down.
Some of the ground forces were directed into the crash site, and the guys were able to be evacuated.
Next thing I know, armored personnel carriers turned a corner. They're happy to see us. We're happy to see them.
Our planning, the rehearsals, the contingency plans, all that came into play and essentially saved the day.
Because it was the first successful hostage rescue, I think that was proof positive that the system, the way it was designed, worked.
The rescue in Panama really set the stage for, in many ways, the special operations missions we see today.
It's the first known successful hostage rescue operation in modern U.S. military history. And until now, few knew it was Delta Force. Today, the unit's unique skill set is ideally suited for the most important threats the nation faces.
When we talk about the war on terror today, this is the first special operations war. This is the kind of war that special ops were designed to fight.
More shots heard in the Olympic Village
An American
tonight.
jet was seized by gunmen.
The unit itself was forged in the furnace of global terror overseas that emerged in the late 1970s.
More than 200 have been killed and hundreds more injured.
Delta Force is a creation of the rise of terrorism. The Munich Olympics, planes are being hijacked. These are sort of things that never existed in the world before.
At the time, the SAS, Britain's Special Air Services, was the premier counter-terrorism force of its day. The U.S. needed a special operations force of its own, and SAS became the template for Delta Force.
There was a feeling in the U.S. that while they did have what they called U.S. Army Special Forces, they hadn't been trained to the same kind of levels that the SAS had in the UK. Now, I think the founders of Delta wanted to do something similar in the sense they wanted to be able to cream off the very best soldiers from a wide variety of units in order to get all sorts of different skills into the unit.
I think a crude way to look at it is to say that Delta Force operators are like super rangers. You're taking those skills and you're polishing them and polishing them and polishing them until you get a very, very professional soldier, very professional product out of all that training.
These are guys who've done things that we can't even comprehend, and have skills that are difficult for us to understand.
The Tier 1 units are operating when people really don't know what's happening. It might be you're in a country prior to something happening. There might be hostages that the public doesn't know about.
They are the Army's Tier 1 Special Missions Unit, known as Delta Force, or simply the unit.
Yeah, they go by many names, all of them unofficial.
For those on the inside, it's just CAG, Combat Applications Group.
Because no one speaks of Delta Force officially.
And many who get there start here at Fort Benning, qualifying as Army Rangers. These are some of the toughest of the tough.
What you're doing is you're taking elite soldiers out of Special Forces and Rangers, and you're training them to ridiculously high levels.
It's from these ranks, and from the best of the 82nd Airborne, Special Forces or Green Berets, that Delta Force selects its operators. Those who make it into the unit have already served their country, often in combat. Their average age is mid-30s.
I did enlisted time, lieutenant time, captain time in the Rangers, and then I had the opportunity to try out for the unit.
I started out in Special Forces, then went to the selection and assessment program for Delta.
Started out as a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne. From there, I went to 5th Special Forces. After that, I decided to try out for a special mission unit.
Trying out to be an operator is just the beginning of a long, grueling path.
To get into Delta, based on what we know, twice a year they hold selection processes.
Selection is a month-long course designed to choose from the best combat-hardened soldiers in the U.S. military to go into the operator qualification course.
Out of my 2 classes of 120 people each, probably 12 to 14 made it.
90% of our best soldiers can't make it through selection. Of the 10% who do get selected and then go on to the operator qualification course, up to 50% of them still wash out throughout the process.
The exact standards required to make it as a Tier 1 operator are highly classified.
I don't really know what they're looking for because that's a secret, and I was never allowed to see those shiny rocks.
Everyone thinks they look like the middle linebacker for the Washington Redskins, you know? I would tell you that's very small. You got short guys, middle guys, bald guys, people that just blend in.
It's not always the best guy that makes it. It's the right guy. That's the key.
The right guy has to be able to go undercover if necessary and blend into the local culture.
You might have individuals that, at first glance, no one would think they're in the military, let alone in a special operations unit.
When I was in Afghanistan, you would run into a guy that you would think, well, that's just a local Afghan, or that's a member of the Afghan National Army. But every once in a while, one of them would show up in a place that has maybe sensitive material lying around, and you're looking at him and you're wondering, do we need to tackle this guy? Do we need to shoot him? What's going on here? What is he doing here? And then someone across the room will say, hey, Bill, come over here. And this guy that you thought was an Afghan local walks up with a California accent.
But for Special Missions Unit operators, the bottom line is always their specialized combat skills.
We may have a hostage situation where we can't cordon off the area and just wait and wait. If we have hostages, we do not have a choice. We must enter that objective now, and we use close quarter battle to do that.
Close quarters battle, or CQB, are skills an operator needs to be second nature and hardwired.
Clear the corners first, which is the biggest threat, and then they continue to clear down with one.
James Reese, now retired from Delta Force, runs Tiger Swan, a combat training company for law enforcement and the military that also does threat assessment for private corporations.
And what CQB does is it gets max force into it in an enclosed area very quickly with sectors of fire all spaced out. It's dangerous, but it works. The techniques work. It's fast.
For current operators, live fire CQB training never stops.
When you're going through our training course, that's still a selection process because we don't know if this individual can be trained to the level that we need to until bullets are zinging by him in a CQB environment.
The U.S. military usually issues soldiers a single weapon system.
In our unit, you're issued at a minimum 2, and most operators are carrying more than 2. So you might have a breaching shotgun or some specialized weapon as well.
A handgun is always part of the kit. And today, for most operators, it's the Glock 17.
Pistol shooting is the most difficult form of combat marksmanship. Why are we doing this? This is to build some movement into it, because that's one of the things.
Larry Vickers is a professional firearms trainer and consultant. He also spent 15 years in Delta Force.
Handgun is like life insurance policy. It's your weapon of last resort. If something goes wrong with your long gun and you have to transition your handgun, that pistol and your skill set are the only thing that are going to allow you to see the sunrise the next morning.
Delta is a very unconventional unit. That's one thing I don't think people realize, is that they're able to develop their own tactics, techniques, and procedures. I think that's one of the main strengths of this unit, is that by somewhat existing outside the formal command structure of the military, it gives them the flexibility to be adaptive.
You know, most people just think of snipers as people who shoot from a distance, but Delta Force, it's more of a reconnaissance specialist and someone who can take on especially sensitive missions.
Delta Force deploys with the latest advances in optics, from night vision to thermal targeting, in order to complete missions that almost always take place literally and figuratively in the dark. The latest technology includes thermal optics that sense the heat emitted by the sniper's target and helps the shooter see through obstacles like dust and foliage. A Delta sniper is now a tracker and observer, but he's still the team member who may first engage the enemy.
Once the first shot goes off, that's not the end of the fight. First shot gets everybody moving around, and then after that, it's game on, and you can do some combat shooting. Now, everybody is some superstar grandmaster shooter, but they are the best combat shooters in the world. And there's a big difference, because when things are going bang and there's dirt in your face, that's when the combat marksman shines. It's a different breed of shooter.
The reality for Delta Force is that its secrecy means it rarely gets credit for missions accomplished.
You know, when things go right, we have no idea they were even involved. When they do go wrong, even if it's not of their doing, that's when Delta Force makes the headline.
There has been an American effort to rescue the hostages at the embassy in Tehran, and it has failed.
One of the first known Delta missions is triggered when Iranian students take 52 Americans hostage.
The taking of hostages in Iran at our embassy in Tehran certainly set Delta to a new level of readiness. We were notified immediately.
It's April 1980, 5 months into the hostage crisis. Jimmy Carter orders the president's secret army into action.
My team was going to be on 2 C-141s that were going to meet the assault force with the hostages at the airfield that the Rangers were going to take.
Codenamed Operation Eagle Claw, the plan calls for 6 helicopters to rendezvous at a remote site, Desert One, to refuel before Delta Force will mount a nighttime raid to free the hostages.
We needed 6 helicopters to do the job. 8 were chosen. 2 never made it into Iran. One of them had a mechanical right after it took off from the Nimitz. So we were left with 5.
Without the required number of helicopters, the commanders on the scene decide to abort the mission. President Carter gives his approval.
And it's then that the accident happens.
A helicopter crashes into a C-130 filled with thousands of gallons of jet fuel. The resulting inferno kills 8 men, and the mission goes down in history as a disastrous accident.
Some people think that the mission was aborted because of the accident, but the mission was aborted before the accident.
Delta Force didn't fail their mission. They had to abort it before their role in the operation even began.
The analogy that's been put out there about that is, would you blame the quarterback if his team lost the Super Bowl if the bus crashed on the way to the game and they didn't even get to the stadium? That was kind of what happened to Delta Force.
First off, Desert One, really for our country, it was a tragedy, and men lost their lives. But it also was a wake-up call for us.
The wake-up call was the need for greater coordination between the Army, Navy, and Air Force.
Everyone wanted a piece of the operation. You had the Marines and the Navy and the Army, and everyone is involved, but they weren't accustomed to really working together closely.
To avoid another disaster, the panel recommended a single permanent anti-terrorist command be established, bringing together special forces from all the military services.
The result was the formation of SOCOM, the Special Operations Command, and under it, JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, which directs elite units like Delta.
Out of the ashes of Desert One, the United States has been able to now have a special operations force projection unlike any in the world, far beyond what any other nation has.
In October 1993, that force projection sends the unit to Mogadishu after the United Nations Security Council declares total war on Somali warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid.
Members of the Pentagon super-secret Delta Force reportedly are among the American troops arriving in Somalia.
But before the mission ends, it becomes clear. Not all the lessons of Desert One have been taken to heart.
It would look like Mogadishu was a repeat of Desert One, when everybody had their own pieces that they wanted to play.
When a Delta Force-led mission goes awry, an all-night firefight ensues. It's known as the Battle of Mogadishu and is popularized in the film Black Hawk Down.
The mission on 3-4 October, we had transitioned from going from Aidid himself to his tier assets. When I say tier assets, his colonels, his infrastructure. So what happened is we've got an intel hit that there was a meeting.
The plan is for Delta Force operators, inserted by Little Bird helicopters, to capture some of Aidid's colonels from the meeting place in the center of the teeming city.
In that mission, the central raiding party, if you like, were Delta Force operators, and the Rangers were providing the cordon around the building that the Delta operators were looking for targets in.
Support troops would fast rope down from hovering Black Hawks to provide security by cordoning off the area from the Somali militia. Meanwhile, a ground convoy is to make its way to the target building to exfiltrate the assault team and prisoners back to base. The entire operation is supposed to take just 30 minutes. But multiple disasters unfold. And Delta operators, speaking out for the first time, say the contingency planning and coordination with conventional forces, so effective in the 1989 Panama hostage rescue, fell short on this mission.
There were some communication problems above that hadn't been resolved during our rehearsals.
You had your primary assault force, you had the Rangers, who typically are used as a support asset or a blocking force, keeping the bad guys away from the objective area. But when everything went bad and the birds started going down, because they were getting so many, too many chiefs trying to give directions.
Under intense fire from the Somali militia, a Black Hawk helicopter call sign Super 61 is shot down by a rocket-propelled grenade.
We rehearsed prior to going to Mogadishu, Somalia, and one of the things that happened during our rehearsal was we had an aircraft go down and start on fire, and the pilots were injured severely. And that's when we came up with the plan that we would move on foot to that crash site immediately, not on vehicles because we couldn't move through the tight streets in vehicles, but that was our plan.
What ends up happening is that convoy at one point is told to link up with us at the crash site. The problem is that the information was not passed down to the convoy what they were looking for.
According to Kyle Lamb, a special missions unit operator on the ground, the convoy leader hadn't been briefed on Delta's contingency plan.
When Super 61 was shot down in Mogadishu, one of the people on the ground had not been there and didn't understand what our plan was. So he went and actually stopped and picked up some of the Rangers and exfilled them off the battlefield in his convoy, never to return again. Think about arriving somewhere and you're missing half of your team. And that's because of one individual not knowing what the plan was, the contingency planning, which we take very, very seriously. That's not on the movie Black Hawk Down, but that was a movie, that wasn't reality.
Another problem. Under heavy fire, the ground convoy is getting mixed signals from the command control helicopter, trying to relay directions from high overhead.
There was a 7 to 8 second delay in communications from directing them because of the relay. Well, what happened is they might blow through one intersection, two intersections, turn down the wrong intersection. It might be a dead-end street.
They took wrong turns and had to do U-turns, and all that time, they're getting fired upon.
Then Paul Howe, who leads another Delta team on the mission, hears ominous call signs come over his radio.
I heard 2 calls for help from the other Blackhawk with Randy Shugart and Gary Gordon. What ended up happening, I used to be on a sniper team, worked with these guys my whole career. I heard the element call, the call sign, and I knew it was a sniper team. Didn't know where they were. Hadn't got the call over the radio that we had a second Blackhawk down.
A second Blackhawk is shot down, and Delta snipers Shugart and Gordon are holding off a large mob of Somalis.
About 30 minutes later, I heard the same call, but he goes, hey, we're going to need some help down here or we're going to get overrun. At that point, they were never heard from again.
Overnight, the second crash site is overrun by thousands of Somalis, and the 2 Delta snipers are killed.
Those guys are hanging by themselves, lightly armed, against overwhelming odds where they should have had a couple gunbirds making runs for them and just keeping the bad guys at bay.
The world is transfixed by images of the bodies of the 2 Delta snipers and Black Hawk crew members being dragged through the streets of Mogadishu.
Americans didn't even realize that there were military actions taking place until dead Americans showed up on the news.
The operation, in which 18 Americans and hundreds of Somalis are killed, becomes a political debacle for the Clinton administration.
Different people look at this battle, Somalia, as a debacle. All the missions were accomplished that day on 3-4 October. We went in, city, over 1 million people, against overwhelming odds. We secured the people we wanted to secure.
There was a lot of great men on the ground that day that made the ultimate sacrifice, you know, doing what they needed to do for our mission there and for their mates on their left and their right. We fought a good fight there.
After Mogadishu in 1993, it appears both the White House and the Pentagon become gun-shy in terms of sending the unit into subsequent operations.
The nation was quite risk-averse in a number of ways, and they had this high-speed unit that they were almost afraid to use. General Peter Schumacher, former Delta commander, described it as, you know, having a Ferrari in the garage, but no one wants to dent the fender.
Delta Force returns to the shadows, but that doesn't mean they're not active.
They've been involved in many operations in the past that I'm aware of, but many people in the public are not. Very notable figures overseas were eliminated by operations of the unit, but you didn't see it in the news.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there.
With the advent of the war on terror, Delta Force is in its element.
Prior to 9/11, Delta had a number of successes, but more often they trained up for missions that were ultimately called off.
The President and the Pentagon can now justify Special Operation Forces, or SOF, to meet a threat that struck home in America itself. 3 months after 9/11, word leaks out that Delta Force is hunting Osama bin Laden in the mountains of Tora Bora, Afghanistan. But when the Al-Qaeda leader slips away, the unit is again associated with a failure.
America wanted to put an Afghani face on the operation for whatever reason. So the Delta Squadron was kind of saddled with some Afghani allies of questionable allegiance.
Locals may have let bin Laden cross over to Pakistan, and Delta Force is denied extra assets to seal off the border.
You know, at Tora Bora, again, you look at what was asked for the SOF forces on the ground. Work with an indigenous force. I would tell you, if it was a unilateral force and the assets were available, might have been a complete different operation.
Just weeks after Tora Bora, we now know Delta Force is a key part of a campaign to destroy the last big pocket of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. This time, the unit's role, working alongside conventional forces, is critical to the mission's success.
Operation Anaconda was America's first battle of the 21st century. It was supposed to be an encirclement of the Al-Qaeda forces in the Shaykhot Valley in eastern Afghanistan, but unfortunately for the attacking forces, the Al-Qaeda forces were far greater in number than were anticipated.
It's March 2nd, 2002. The U.S. military expects Al-Qaeda forces to be grouped on the floor of the valley. And 2 Delta teams and 1 SEAL Team 6 unit are sent in advance to get eyes on the enemy.
Those 3 teams were absolutely critical to the level of success that the United States was able to achieve in Operation Anaconda.
50% of Delta was pretty much sent in Afghanistan to operate.
For an operation this important, Delta sends in their most highly tuned tactical athletes.
Operation Anaconda, there was a subset of Delta Force called AFOs, Advanced Force Operations, an even more elite group of Delta Force.
Before that mission took place, these guys were training in the grueling wilderness in Montana in unimaginably cold weather, just completely inhospitable terrain.
Those Delta operators were going in, you know, as the saying goes, alone and unafraid.
How they were going to get there, looking at the terrain, looking at the environment, dealing with all those environmental issues of the rain, the sleet, the snow, the mist, all those things that they have to deal with, to know that they're going behind enemy lines.
They had to penetrate the Al-Qaeda lines to get in there. It's one of the most daring special operations missions in recent years.
When the operators complete their ascent, they're shocked as they realize the main assault force is walking into a trap.
The United States had sent just about every national reconnaissance asset at its disposal over the valley and had failed to notice what the Delta and SEAL Team 6 operators were able to ascertain.
The advanced force operators are stunned to see the enemy forces are several times larger than expected and located not on the valley floor, but up on the high ground, a tactical advantage.
As things on the valley floor started to go south for the Americans, these 3 teams in their sort of eagle's nests around the valley were able to call in devastating airstrikes that sort of relieved a lot of the pressure on the forces who'd been pinned down on the ground.
Ultimately, Operation Anaconda is considered a victory for U.S. forces, though a costly one. But without the elite Delta units, it would have been disastrous.
It was a very confused and costly victory ultimately for the Americans, but without the AFOs, they didn't have a chance.
The roles performed since 9/11 by Delta Force proved the value of an extraordinarily highly trained, highly motivated, well-equipped human. That human still adds tremendous value to the equation.
With just a very limited number of men, they were maybe the deciding factor in that battle.
Delta's unique assets would prove critical to the coalition's campaign in the next war. Iraq. For the bulk of the Iraq War, especially the battle for Baghdad, Delta Force is the primary Tier 1 unit on the ground. But what's critically effective in Iraq is the way the unit now works alongside conventional forces in the Joint Spec Ops Command's counterinsurgency effort.
You know, it wasn't just a bunch of Tier 1 operators coming in there and stiff-arming some conventional commander. That commander realized that we wanted to hunt the jihadists as bad as they did, whether it was the bomber or a high-level HVT that we were after. We were in for all of it.
Their primary mission at first is hunting down HVTs, or high-value targets, such as the leadership of the former Iraqi regime.
And that was symbolized by the deck of cards. The former regime printed on these cards and they were given out to soldiers so that everybody at a checkpoint hopefully would recognize one of these people.
The ace in the hole, literally, is Saddam Hussein. Acting on key intelligence, Delta launches Operation Red Dawn, tracking the brutal dictator to a remote Iraqi farm. Saddam is found cowering in a spider hole and pleads, "I'm willing to negotiate." But the Delta operator's response is simply, "President Bush sends his regards."
Ladies and gentlemen, We got him.
Immediately, they took Saddam, they handed him off to conventional army forces, and then Delta disappeared from the scene.
The operation was carried out with skill and precision by a brave fighting force.
Of course, later we found out that it was Delta.
But soon the focus shifts away from Saddam and his cronies to a new, more dangerous threat. Baghdad, 2003. Under Delta Force Commander General Stanley McChrystal, JSOC, the Joint Spec Ops Command, begins to emphasize the use of shared intelligence derived from all sources, from cell phone tracking to predator drones, to accelerate the hunt for jihadists and insurgents.
Delta was able to bring to bear the full force of the United States intelligence and military arsenal.
JSOC had an unquenchable thirst for eyes in the sky, in particular for unmanned aerial vehicles like the Predator, to track a target non-stop in a process that they came to describe as the unblinking eye.
They had constant UAV surveillance and hours, hundreds of hours of video footage that they could trace back, almost like a DVR. You could see car bombs and trace back to see where they originated.
So you've got Air Force drones flying overhead. You've got National Reconnaissance Office satellites zooming in. You've got Delta operatives on the ground doing the targeting.
To defeat the emerging network of Al-Qaeda and its allies, General McChrystal and Delta Force create a network of their own, cooperating on intel in an unprecedented way with other services and America's allies on the ground.
Those task forces used all sources of intelligence to drive missions with increasing rapidity.
You're talking 5 or 6 missions a night, and this is nonstop.
Now we have the ability to literally do forensics right on the site, real time, to drive us to a next target if need be.
Delta's Special Ops Forces seize individuals, cell phones, and documents, and use the intel to drive further missions the same night.
What you have now is you have the soft forces who could move lightning fast with the assets. You have the conventional forces that could cordon off an area. You've got this interagency fight now, this coalition fight coming together, everyone taking the same intelligence, coming to bear at one single point. Boom. You can move faster than that network. You can stop it, you can block it. That was your network that really broke the back inside Iraq.
What's little known outside the military is that the boom in the use of cell phones in Iraq was critical to the success of the counterinsurgency effort.
Now, there's pretty good evidence that when we went in and rebuilt infrastructure, we also, if we're building cell phone towers, well, why not build in a way where we can listen in if we need to? Why not be able to monitor signals transmissions?
Basically took control of the cellular network in Iraq to the point where they had wearable homing devices that could track individual cell phones.
The phone could be used for all sorts of other things too. It was possible under certain circumstances to make the handset go live so that you could hear the conversation of the people in a car, or you could use it to actually eavesdrop on people.
Using all of these forms of intelligence, JSOC started to eat away at the Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
In 2006, Jordanian militant Abu Musab al-Zarqawi is the face of Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
Zarqawi, you could argue that he was the most wanted man in the world at the time. He was prioritized ahead of bin Laden or Zawahiri.
Zarqawi quickly becomes the primary target for Delta Force.
And he proved to be a pretty hard target. He made some pretty narrow escapes, and I think Delta Force, SAS, Special Forces, Rangers all did simultaneous assaults on the hideouts that were deemed most likely to be sheltering him.
They got Zarqawi's laptop. They also got a person who, under interrogation of Balad, led them to the whereabouts of Zarqawi's spiritual guide, Sheikh Rahman. There was then a surveillance operation mounted on this place in Baghdad. So when a tall figure came out of the house to meet Sheikh Rahman, many people in that ops room in Balad felt sure that that was Zarqawi himself.
A Delta operator calls an airstrike on the house.
proved to be a decisive moment in the war in Iraq. And in fact, the insurgency was simply overwhelmed. All of a sudden, they were being annihilated. Everyone was being caught of any value at all. And they were never able to regroup. They were never able to get their refooting after that.
It's hard to come to any other conclusion than that Delta's operations in Iraq were an extraordinary success.
I know people in the SAS who, somewhat to my surprise, said after their experiences in Iraq that they actually thought that Delta Force was better, that it had reached a point that it was so highly trained and it was capable of deploying such advanced technology that they had actually got ahead of the SAS.
If even Britain's SAS thinks Delta is the elite force, some wonder why the unit wasn't the outfit tapped for the biggest counterterrorism strike of them all.
Ahead in this half hour, much more on the killing of Osama bin Laden. The operation was carried out by the Navy's SEAL Team 6.
After Neptune Spear went down and Osama bin Laden was killed, a lot of people wondered right away, well, why did SEAL Team 6 do it? Why didn't Delta do it? I know that pretty much every member of the U.S. Army said, well, why didn't our guys do it?
I think Delta Force felt there was some unfinished business after Tora Bora, so they really wanted that operation.
It was a good thing for the American public, yeah. Do I think they need to say who did it? No. I think they could have just said U.S. forces. The SEALs, God bless them, they're a lot more vocal. They're a lot more, in a lot of ways, we'd say Hollywood. The unit's much more the quiet professionals, and it would have been much more low-key. You wouldn't have had near the exposure that it's had in the press and whatnot.
But they did a great job, and I'm proud of them. I wouldn't tell them that to their face, but they did a great job.
There's a lot of work out there for everyone. And if our nation is going to be successful in protecting our homeland and protecting other people around the world that, don't have the capability that we do, you just can't, you can't put Derek Jeter to the plate every single time.
I think Delta Force is more than happy to let somebody else bask in the limelight while they get to continue their operations unabated. Delta Force isn't a unit that wants publicity at all, and rightly so, they remain in the dark.
A lot of people think it may be high time to put the Ferrari back in the garage.
You can only run that Ferrari for so long before you're going to have to do a major overhaul.
So there's a temptation for overuse because they're so effective. No matter what you give them, they can get it done. They can get it done quietly, and they can maintain secrecy afterward. And that's a very hard thing to do in Washington these days.
But now that it's out of the garage, trying to get it back into the garage is going to be very, very difficult.
I think special ops will continue to be used in the capacity they currently are, and hopefully they'll be used to strike maybe a little deeper behind enemy lines than they've been allowed to do in the past.
As hard as it's been to keep track of what Delta's been up to the last 10 years, it's going to be harder the next 10 years. But you can just assume that anywhere there are people on this earth that the United States wants to reach out to, Delta Force is who they're going to send no matter where they're at.
Sometimes you just need a small group of people who can blend into the population, find this one person, kill him, and then disappear. That's what Delta does. They're not out there to get attention. They're out there to get the job done.